Gravity wants to bring us down, and we all fall down. Some of us are even brought to our knees. Gravity describes the natural phenomenon that all physical bodies attract each other. All things on the earth have a smaller mass than the earth itself, and therefore gravity pulls all the objects toward the ground. We are pulled toward the earth, and so in essence, via gravity, we are all connected to one another by that pull. And because the earth is in relationship to the moon through gravity, we are connected to the moon, thusly, and similarly to the sun and the planets and the stars. It's quite incredible, really. And it is because of gravity that we do not float off into space, and it is that same gravity, oddly, that is why we fall. Gravity, to a certain degree, is like a great equalizer. Now, I've always been a bit of a physics junkie. Physics has always carried a sense of awe for me, similarly to art and music or a good book or a good movie. The beauty of physics is not only the natural phenomena that we can explain, it is also what we can create with that understanding. And when you add our ability to work with and in spite of gravity, there is even more to be astounded by. We figured out how to launch a rocket into space, to build bridges that can bear the weight of miles of traffic. We've built buildings as high as 163 floors. And the sheer fact that 76,000 airplanes take off and land daily in the United States alone with little incident is nearly a miracle. Not only because we managed to figure out, but because we are basing everything that we do in physics on approximations. And yet the science still works. Now, I'm very purposefully not going to go down this rabbit hole of explaining why physics is full of approximations, but I highly recommend, if you're even slightly interested, to pick up a little book by Casey Cole called The Universe and the Teacup, if you'd like to learn more about the leaps of faith in one of our most concrete and practical sciences. This morning, though, I just want to begin simply by celebrating humanity with a big wow. Wow. Human beings are really amazing. How many of you have had a chance to see the film Gravity? I hope that you read your parish notes, because if you haven't, I'm about to change your perception of that film, probably. So spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen it yet. The film deserves its own wow. It is visually something to behold. It is a marvel of 3D film production and special effects. And let me also just give kudos to whoever came up with the idea that we needed recliners in a movie theater. But the story also struck me in a way that I hadn't expected. And it took several days of pondering on it before it had its full impact on me. In the film, Sandra Bullock plays Dr. Ryan Stone, a medical engineer on her first space shuttle mission, the Explorer. She's accompanied by veteran astronaut Matt Kowalski, played by George Clooney, who is commanding his final expedition, his last opportunity to be in space. The scale in the film of two tiny astronauts floating around in space next to an enormous blue-green spinning Earth creates a tension for the viewer of the fact that we've managed to get into space, and yet we also are so insignificant. It's as though the filmmakers are prompting us to relish this part of the movie, these gorgeous shots of the Earth from space, but they're also asking us, inviting us to experience the paradox of our significance and our insignificance. As we're introduced to Dr. Stone, she is obviously focused exclusively on her work, on the task, So focused, in fact, that she must be prompted by Kowalski to take in the view which he is relishing for the last time. His character begs us to pay attention to every single moment as if it were never going to happen again. Stone's name suits her well, reminding us not only of her numbness to her own emotion at the beginning of the film, but her name also focuses on the weight of what she carries with her, her story. The burden of having put a young daughter in a grave, who we learn later fell playing tag and hit her head on a stone, a freak accident of falling, of gravity. Stone's name also hints at literature's two key existential moments of malaise related to stones, which mirror Dr. Stone's discomfort in space. The first existential stone belongs to Sisyphus, a figure of Greek mythology who was condemned to repeat forever the same meaningless task of pushing a boulder up a mountain only to see it roll down again, made famous by existentialist author Albert Camus. In Camus' description of life and man's search for meaning, we are all, in some way, Sisyphus, pushing that rock up a hill, only to find ourselves at the bottom again. Camus' essay about Sisyphus concludes, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart, and so one must imagine Sisyphus happy." Now, not everyone who reads Camus comes to the same conclusion. But we do get to decide how we respond to our circumstances. That's, in essence, what the film and the book are explaining. Dr. Stone's name also brings to mind another literary existential crisis by existentialism's beloved author Jean-Paul Sartre. In Sartre's novel Nausea, the main character, Roquentin, is a classic existentialist hero who realizes that man is ultimately responsible for making his or her own meaning. Not God, or culture, or the church, or school, or family, or the media, but we as individuals are ultimately responsible for crafting the meaning of our lives. In a key scene in this novel, Roquentin stands on a beach alone, and he picks up a single stone among thousands. Realizing that he could have picked up any other stone on the beach, he becomes viscerally overwhelmed, both disgusted and elated at the same time, at the randomness of the act and at his own power. Because he chose that particular stone, brought that particular stone into focus, picked up that particular stone with his hand, he gave that stone value and meaning, and not the other hundreds of thousands of stones on the beach. And so it is we who gives weight to every fact and experience, to every object and activity. It is we who strings together the series of events in our lives to write the story of our life as it is being lived. What makes us pay attention to one thing and not the other? Some would say our history, our biology, or the story that we're telling ourselves at the time. Some would say it's completely random. Some things we turn our attention to because they interest us. Some things we turn our attention away from because we've been harmed in the past. And some things just demand our attention, like hunger or poverty. There are circumstances within our control and others that are not. And circumstances we make happen and circumstances that just frankly happen to us. Existentialism, much like the film, is primarily concerned with how the individual human being comes to terms with the experience of being human and being alive, with our own existence. with the most important meaning that we'll have to define in our lives. And according to this philosophy, we are as though adrift in an infinite sea of possible choices of how to come to terms with this existence, an infinite number of possible modes of living, with no secure anchor that guarantees certainty and confidence, even though some philosophies and churches and religions and speakers and commercials might tell you differently. Now, not having certainty affects people in very different ways. In some, it can produce despair and anguish. For many, the desire for certainty creates such despair that they trade their freedom like currency for simple solutions and easy answers, even though no system can hold the complexity of our existence entirely. To others, uncertainty produces awe and wonder. But in the midst of this metaphysical dilemma, we will likely all have to face our own individual crisis, a point in which reason and rationality are not enough. We'll all be forced to make some choice from a place of uncertainty despite not having all the information and with no clear path to the right decision. And we'll have to choose anyway. And what we let influence us matters. This is the existential dilemma. But we can only come to a conscious decision about our choices after making what Søren Kierkegaard calls a leap of faith. A leap that is preceded by an awareness of our own freedom to make that choice and the fact that we might choose wrongly. But nevertheless, we must make the choice if we are truly to live. Now, these kinds of untethered decisions happen regularly in our lives if we are not living a life scripted by someone else. The decision to marry or not. In my own life, I married at 23 just after graduating college because that was the script written for me by this culture. It was so scripted that I didn't even think to question it, even though I knew in my heart that it was not the right thing for me at the time. There are so many scripts in our culture. We must co-create our very own script, working with the facts of our lives in a way that includes our gifts as well as our dreams and our desires. But there are rules that we can follow if we are unsure about important things like to divorce or not, to have a child or not, to take a job or leave one, to bond out of jail or pay a lawyer, to help your neighbor or not, to take a deal or go to trial. In Gravity, Dr. Stone is our allegorical human being facing life who must decide if she is going to participate fully in that life or opt out. The other astronaut, Matt Kowalski, is a live-in-the-moment kind of guy. George Clooney playing George Clooney, it seems, which he does very well. Through his interactions with Dr. Stone, his curiosity, his expression of gratitude and awe, and his stories, Kowalski appears to be present and grateful and full of life and love. Now, as you've probably seen from the trailer, Stone detaches from the space station while spacewalking, leaving her tumbling through space. Spinning out of control, she has to find her bearings. And we tumult with her, untethered, especially if you're in 3D, in a scene which creates its own real nausea for those who are sensitive to it. But like a ballerina in pirouette, Stone must find her focal point to maintain control. Her GPS broken, her technology and safety nets having failed her, she must make a choice to give up or to try to survive. She is spinning out of control in the vastness of space without any bearings. How do you know where you are when the answer is always in relationship to something else? Stone is lost. and there appears to be no way to stop the momentum. When our ground is only found in relationship to where we are, the question is, what do you place as your focal point? What will be your guiding star, your sun, your core values? You see, we get to choose that. For Stone, she had to search for the largest object in her midst before she could even make sense of anything else. Where was the sun and the earth? And she was running out of air too. So she was gulping, not sipping. If you've ever been thrown adrift in life by unforeseen circumstances, maybe that kind of a feeling will be familiar to you. The feeling of being so overwhelmed that all we can do is the very next most important thing. Open your eyes, or breathe, or get out of bed. Sometimes simply showing up clothed is a miracle. Stone finds the sun, her focal point, and Kowalski eventually retrieves her, and now we have one lone, untethered astronaut tethered to another, the blind leading the blind, so to speak. But they make their way toward the station. Communications with mission control are lost, but Stone and Kowalski keep jabbering on to each other and to themselves just in case someone can hear them. They are filling the silence. It is their prayer, in essence, an attempt to be seen and heard, to make their wishes known despite whether anyone else is listening or not. Arriving at the space station, Stone's leg gets tangled in parachute cords, and she's able to grab a strap on Kowalski's suit as they push and pull each other away from the station in space, slamming each other against the station and then pushing each other farther away. This goes on for a while, and despite Stone's protests, Kowalski eventually detaches himself from the tether to save Stone from drifting away with him. And she is pulled back towards the station. As Kowalski floats away to his death, he radios her to additional instructions and encouragement, and he tells her that she is going to have to learn to let go. It's interesting because even in his last moments, they are of awe and gratitude, noticing how beautiful the water looks in the sunlight on the Ganges below. All things have a beginning and an ending. It is the nature of life. Stone crawls into the space station and takes off her suit, floating in a fetal position for an extended shot, just to make sure we don't miss the point. Why do we cling to the things that harm us? What is the force that pushes and pulls us toward objects that we are trying to let go of? Well, you see, gravity in itself has no morality. Gravity does just what gravity does. And so it's up to us to distance ourselves far enough so that the pull reduces until we are safe. To unhook ourselves from that which pulls us away of being on our chosen path, of following our own values, even when it is someone or something we have come to love, and even when it hurts. Stone manages to make it to a capsule, and she aligns it with the Chinese space station, but discovers that the craft's thrusters have no fuel. After a brief communication via radio with some Inuit fisherman who does not understand her distress, Stone listens to him cooing a baby and singing a lullaby, and lets herself be lulled, resigning herself to be stranded. Stone contemplates a holy card on the dash of this capsule depicting the patron saint of travelers, St. Christopher, placed there by some astronaut before her who had abandoned the capsule. Stone says that if she dies, no one will pray for her soul. Then she says, if I'd say a prayer for myself, but no one ever taught me how. And then she begins to pray anyway, asking for help. Her prayer seemingly unanswered, she is resigned to her own demise. She shuts down the oxygen supply of the cabin in order to commit a painless suicide. As Stone begins to lose consciousness, Kowalski appears outside the window as I, in the theater, await for Stone's head to explode, and I'm about to shout at the screen, "No!" Because if he really is there, in a sort of Hollywood, predictable, happy ending moment sort of way, Stone didn't have her helmet on, and so her head would have just been exposed to space and pressure, and when he opened the airlock... But when she didn't explode, I immediately believed that she was hallucinating. Others, my wife included, believe that it is at this point of the film Stone actually dies. Now, I'm going to give you a minute because I lost people in the last sermon for a minute while they thought through the end of the movie. So the rest of her film is her experience of the afterlife and reincarnation, her soul moving from capsule to capsule with foreign languages and different cultures, different things on the buttons and different gods to guide her way until she's finally reborn on Earth. Pretty intense. What we see on the film, however, and I disagree, by the way, what we see on the film, however, is Kowalski in the capsule with her, scolding her for giving up, cheerleading her on, telling her what she already knew but had forgotten, to use the capsule's landing rockets to propel it towards the Chinese station in some last-ditch effort for survival. Stone is given new strength and the will to live on. She awakens, I believe, turns up the oxygen in the capsule, restores the flow of oxygen, and uses the landing rockets to navigate her towards the Chinese station. Feeling that her prayers were answered, she now prays again, telling the now absent Kowalski to send her love to her dead daughter and to tell her that she won't give up. In the Chinese station, she encounters a smiling statue of the Buddha. It seems all who voyage into space have markers to help them along the way, stories to which they can attach their own story, to give them assistance on the journey, to remind them that when they are untethered, they are not alone. Stone enters the capsule just as it's falling back to Earth and it starts to break up on the upper edge of the atmosphere. And as the capsule re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, Stone hears mission control over the radio tracking the capsule. And in her final leap of faith, Stone says, "The way I see it, there are two possible outcomes. Either I make it down there in one piece and I have one hell of a story to tell, or I burn up in the next 10 minutes. But either way, whichever way, no harm, no foul. Because no matter what, it's going to be one hell of a ride and I'm ready." Fully awake to her circumstances, she plummets to the earth. Landing in a lake for what seems like the 85th minute of suspense, Stone seems to be birthed again, but there's a fire in the capsule. She's trying to get out of the door, and it's water's rushing in, and she's weighed down by her spacesuit, and she has to peel out of it and swim to the top of this lake into the air. She emerges, leaving it behind, baptized in a way to this new life that she is now participating in fully. Stone crawls to shore. She grasps the wet sand, that dust from which we have all been made, and mutters the final word and prayer of the movie: thanks. She takes her first shaky steps on land, reborn and alive in the full gravity of the earth. The suspense that this film creates is an experience of existential anxiety that asks us to question our own lives. How do we make meaning of our own existence? Do we live fully present to all of our choices? Or do we resign ourselves to the circumstances of life or the scripts that we didn't participate in writing? The film asks us too, what would we do if we were faced with complication after complication, disaster after disaster? Are we that resilient? Would we give up? Or would we fight, taking the biggest risks possible all the way to the end? We're asked to look deeply at what it means to be a human being, at the same time so powerful and yet so fragile. The film asks us to consider what will ground us in the face of a difficulty that is so great that we cannot even conceive of its possibility in this moment. I have been privileged to walk with many in this church, atheist and humanist, theist of all sorts of theologies, in the face of the unthinkable, the death of a child, the unanticipated diagnosis, the bottom of an addiction, freak accidents, mental breakdowns, floods, tornadoes, fires, and felonies. What will ground you in the face of the unimaginable? And one of the reasons why I love this film so much is that no matter your theological persuasion, the answer underlying the film's response to what grounds us in these moments is love and our connectedness to other human beings. Stone wants her story to be one of doing everything she can to thrive in the face of disaster for herself and for her daughter and for those who didn't make it home. She is grounded and changed by her interactions with Kowalski, of actually being curious about her story and her telling it to him, being vulnerable, and his challenge to let go, for her to let go of that which is not serving her. When we are untethered, we have a choice to stay isolated or to connect, to reach out or to shut down. We can open our hearts and be vulnerable to another, give of ourselves, and discover the very thing which actually might sustain us. And this church offers that opportunity regardless of your theology, to bind yourself in community to a diverse group of people bound together by their agreement to explore the very freedom and responsibility of choice in our search for truth. A community who challenges us to stay in relationship, to care for more than just ourselves. Now, from a cosmological perspective, gravity causes dispersed matter to coalesce. Gravity makes the separate come together. And it is the force which causes things that are already together, coalesced matter, to remain intact. The gravity of our situation on earth calls us to coalesce with other beings during this tumbling through life, to tether ourselves to a living, breathing, changing, vibrant community who lifts up our values, who when necessary can hold us accountable, and who when necessary can hold us together. It's one hell of a ride. Are you ready?